Oh,
Not organized project.
I'm not sure this one's working.
oh, it's this,
Thank you. So hi, everybody. I'm Julie Fong. I'm a professor in our department, in pediatrics. And I run the Skeletal Dysplasia Center here at Johns Hopkins, so all forms of genetic skeletal conditions. That's me. And I do a lot of clinical work, clinical trials, that sort of thing. Everybody here pretty much is first year, is that right? At the end of first year? Awesome, okay. I know this is tiresome, but it's a small group. Can you just tell me your names? Because since it's so rare we're in rooms with people, I'd love to know who you are. You can say anything else you want, but if you could at least just tell me your name. And if you have questions about anything, please just interrupt me, okay? Do you mind if we start over here?
Oh, my name's Haley.
Haley. Nice to meet you.
I'm Valeria.
Valeria, great.
I'm Lauren.
Lauren, okay.
Daniel?
Danian, got it. Along for the ride.
oh, I know, I was that on one of these.
Okay, that's right, along for the ride.
Alex.
Carter.
Janae.
Alex,
Janae.
Janae, great.
Dina.
Tina, okay.
I'm Zoe.
Zoe,
Anthony.
Maya.
Maya, I know you. If you see me in the hallways or something, say hello, and say hello to you as well. I think that's important also. Sounds like it should be good.
On the computer, click on the forward arrow one time, and then I'll do it.
Do the arrow first, and then the number dots. Okay. Here's what we're going to cover today. You'll get a copy of the slides. I mentioned, actually to a couple of you already, that I actually have to leave at 11:30, so you get a little bit of extra time. And there are a bunch of slides, a lot of content. I'm going to hit the important pieces, and if you have questions about any part of it later, I'm around. We're going to hit the trial types and phases and timelines. That's kind of a basic part of the lecture, and probably some of that you've heard before, but I'm going to give it to you from the perspective of a clinical researcher and where this comes in. Who starts a trial? Why did they start a trial? How do you start it? The overall process, and that is from the perspective of doing it here at Hopkins. Pieces and parts of it are the same no matter where you go in the United States. Pieces and parts of it are the same, but lots different if you're in different countries. But I'll talk it through from that perspective. The next part, opportunities in academia. So the whole section is academia, or is opportunities, pitfalls, and considerations. Big idea things just to share with you in case you're thinking this is a pathway you want to take. I'm also going to talk about the trials that we actually have going on right now at Hopkins within the Skeletal Dysplasia Center. And then there's a glossary at the end because there's a lot of little acronyms about things through clinical trial stuff that's important to get to know. These are my disclosures. They've all been submitted to Hopkins, and I do consult with a lot of the companies that I work on are very rare diseases. So it is a unique part of clinical trials that very often the companies that are developing these trials or even managing them, there's nobody else that really knows a lot about the patients that they're doing the trials on. Talk some about the process of getting to that. So myself, I, and other key opinion leaders, that's your first acronym, KOLs, we often consult on these trials, and then we're also the places that do the trials themselves. So let's get into the trial types. Treatment trials is primarily what we're going to talk about, studying IP, investigational pharmaceuticals. Treatment trials also can be like trying out new surgeries, trying out a new piece of equipment, that sort of thing. Like I said, we're going to focus on drug trials basically. Prevention trials are pretty much what they say, anything that you can do to actually prevent some sort of an outcome. A vaccine trial is a great one to think of as an example for that. Quality of life trials, this is something that's finally getting a lot more attention. So there's always been a big disconnect, I would say, especially in rare diseases, between people that say, I got this great idea, we have this new piece of equipment, we've got this new drug, let's give it to everybody, everybody's gonna want it because they've got this condition. But actually, maybe they don't. Maybe it doesn't mean something the same to them that it does to the person who's developed it. And I find this to be very, very true in rare diseases. There's either a huge, huge enthusiasm for it because no one's ever studied it and it's a very severe condition, or it's the other end of the spectrum in rare diseases, like we're fine, we don't need it. Deaf community and even the short stature community I'm going to talk about here. So that's kind of a unique thing, but people are finally paying attention to this and doing this. Screening trials, cancer trials are a good one to think about this. If you're detecting things earlier, is that why people might have longer survival? Or is your treatment that you're studying in the next phase really the thing that's making the difference? Diagnostic trials speaks for itself. In natural history studies, I highlighted that one, underlined it, bolded it, because in rare conditions, again, someone might have the idea to do some big intervention, but if you actually don't know the natural history, the natural course of that rare condition, you have nothing to compare to when you implement a trial. And this is something that's very real. It's just happened in the last decade for me personally related to short stature dysplasias. That's who I take care of. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit too. And in rare conditions, coming at this from the genetic standpoint, it's important to keep that in mind. And you potentially could be part of some parts of these natural history studies, even if you fancy yourself seeing like I'm always going to be in the lab. Having the ability to cross over into other areas, or maybe you decide, gosh, this is really what I want to do. I want to run some kind of trials and I want to use my knowledge from this to that. Being able to cross over into different areas is really useful. And natural history is a big one that's like that.
For treatment and prevention trials, is it for novel drug development or is it also for FDA-approved drugs that can now be used?
Both.
Okay.
Both. So brand new condition, I just found the gene for this or that. I'm the only person in the world that sees the 50 people with what this condition is. I'm going to do any one of those trials, or I want to study hypertension. We found a new mechanism. Or I'm going to say Me Too drugs, that's a term people use. A drug that was used to treat malaria actually has a positive effect in terrible eczema or something like that, okay? So that's a Me Too thing and all of them apply. Does everybody know about clinicaltrials.gov? You should put this in your back pocket when your family figures out that you're connected somehow to genetics and medicine. They'd be like, your Uncle Bob has, a weird condition. Where are the trials? And they're going to expect that you know that is. So clinicaltrials.gov. Every trial that's in the United States has to go through the FDA for approval to do it to ensure that it's safe for people to participate in, and then it's listed here. And the website has like, where do you go to get involved, what's being studied, what are the risks, blah, blah, blah. It's a good website. And if you're studying something like, well, gosh, I wonder if anybody is looking into, lipodystrophy with respect to diabetes or something, because you're thinking about that, look and see if there's a trial. It's a good resource. Okay, clinical trial phases. Preclinical, lots and lots and lots of work, time, money, everything goes into that. There's lots and lots of work, time, and money goes into all of these, but this is where sort of the initial idea, the basic idea might come from in the lab, in animal studies, sometimes in other human studies, and then studying cell lines, things like that. That's all the stuff that gives the ammunition to move further into 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, in general, is the first time that drug, intervention, piece of equipment, process, whatever, is being used in people, and it's done to assess safety and sometimes dosing, but mostly safety. So sometimes those are healthy individuals that volunteer to take some new medicine. They'll usually be admitted, they'll be followed extremely closely. They've got MRIs and seizure protocols and lab values and all kinds of things that are collected to make sure the drug's not doing something really untoward to them. Sometimes phase 1 trials are people that are just basically at the end of their treatment. So someone who has cancer, if there's a new trial out, you don't waste a lot of time in well, should it be this dose or that dose, or give it on Tuesdays or Tuesdays and Thursdays? You know, if this is a person who has an untreatable other form, they may enroll in a phase 1 trial to try a brand new medication that hasn't been given to anybody else and will only be given to them.
Is that kind of like the same as like compassionate use, or is that like, I guess, slightly separate? Like, does that like data go into their trial if there's like a negative outcome?
So compassionate use, that term is used in a couple of different ways. So every time you do any kind of a trial, you need to have IRB approval to be able to do it. And sometimes you can put a protocol through an IRB for compassionate use for some drug that maybe is being studied, like in that clinicaltrials.gov. It's being studied at these 5 other centers, but you happen to have a patient here at Johns Hopkins. We're not a participant in that trial, but they've got the rare condition or they've got a condition, and you can get approval sometimes to do that. And so that's called compassionate use. That's kind of the bigger term for how it's used. If it's a phase 1 trial, I don't mean this in a flippant way, you're being compassionate in trying it and using it that person. It's not really the terminology of it, it's really a phase 1 trial, recognizing that you're just really at the exploratory part of the beginning. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Phase 2, now this is when you're actually going to try different doses. Building up a dose, might have a cohort at the low level, then double it, then double it. Following those people very closely, because again, only a few other people have had the drug or intervention or treatment or whatever. So you're watching that, they're getting lots of labs, making sure it's safe, and the pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic studies that you do in this, so kinetic, how you're metabolizing it, dynamic, what's it do to the person. You're studying all that stuff very closely because that's what you're going to use to figure out, okay, this is the dose and the frequency and how we're going to do the intervention in the phase 3 trial. The phase 3 trial is the biggie. That's your pivotal trial. That's the one, all this RDC, BPC, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled. Really important one, that's called the pivotal trial. It's the one to try and prove, yep, this does something better than what was baseline because we did it against placebo. And that, once you have the data from that trial, that's what an individual or a company will go to the FDA for and say, I want to get approval for this drug, okay? And then phase 4 or post-marketing, lots of times, especially again in rare diseases, or in like a riskier treatment type of scenario, maybe like in psychiatric illness and treating some drug like that, or brand new, really invasive surgical procedure, something like that, you have to keep following people even after the FDA says it's approved to make sure that there isn't something new that we didn't know about in the trials that wasn't good, that was bad for patients, so that you can follow forward. Sound good? Timeline. This is on some kinds of old data. I say like over the last decade, but it's pretty true. These are general numbers to have in mind that are unfortunately kind of true. So 12 to 15 years for a drug to get from that first part in a lab, an idea, to actually out to people in the US. Probably getting faster in some ways. Who knows right now with the current state that we're in things, but hopefully things will circle back to normalcy. 5 out of 5,000 or 1 in 1,000, I realize I could have put it that way, investigational pharmaceuticals in preclinical trials actually get to humans. And then 1 of every 5 that actually got to humans and went through all those expensive and long-term trials actually gets approved. So here's just the basic timeline building up from it. There is a filing that has to go to the FDA after that beginning step before you can even give it to anybody to start off, like, hey, I think I've got a good idea. Here's all the data to prove that this should work. I have this thing that I want to go forward with as an investigational new drug. I'm going to do all this from the perspective of drugs from here on out. And here's all the toxicology stuff in animals, la, la, la. Can I have approval to go further? Usually, right now, that's from the perspective of a company doing that. But you've probably all met Hillary Vernon. She partnered with a pharmaceutical company to use a medication in Barth syndrome patients, and she was really the PI for it. So it is still possible to do INDs. It's just a really complex process for one person to take on. Okay, then you get into that phase 1, first in humans. Phase 2, what's the right dose? How's it getting metabolized? That sort of thing. You go back to the FDA and say, hey, look, we've got all this these data, it looks really good, here's our dose, here's what we want to do, now we want to do our pivotal trial. They say yes or no, hopefully they say yes. I put numbers in here. These are in general for other clinical trials, hypertension, diabetes, a new surgery to help fracture bones, something like that. You can take 1 to 2 orders of magnitude down in the test population in rare conditions and be able to do a phase 3 study. So some of the trials that I've been involved with were pivotal trial was 60 versus 60, 50 versus 50, only recruiting 30 people, it's kind of smaller in that way. And then to market, question mark, if it gets out there, then you have to prove that there's some kind of unmet need, that there's something better about this than what you had to start with, and then it'll go further from there. And that's the rest of the time, one approved out of all those thousands that started off and go through there. And I'm glad to say that I've been involved now in some drugs that actually have made it through that process, and it's kind of rewarding when it gets to that place. Yeah.
So you were talking about how phase 4 is following the patients. Is that following the phase 3 patient or a new set of patients?
Sure, a little bit of both. A little bit of both. So I'll give you an example. The pivotal trial, phase 3 trial, I didn't say, sometimes that's a year. It's a 6-month trial or it's a year-long trial. If there was a positive effect in it, and you've obviously got a placebo group and a treatment group, at the end of that trial, when the company or the individual has all the data that they need, the people that were on placebo, they start to get the drug now. And then they're followed, usually in a trial that's called an OLE trial, open label extension. And depending on what the treatment is or what you're trying to address or whatever, usually that pharmaceutical substance or whatever would be available to them as long as they want. So they would be studied because they still have some connection to it, get it for free, followed for a long time, and there'll be like parts of their trial, they would still be on the trial. But out in the real world, when people wrote a script for it and they started on it, their data also kind of at the mercy of the person who wrote the script, but should be turning that stuff into the FDA so that they're being followed. Kind of varies according to the drug. In cancer, when it's out like that, there's really strict things that are followed. The Cystic Fibrosis Foundation has been, they have demonstrated an amazing model of, I'm going to use the word forcing pharma to do what they want. So they said, we're going to organize every person who has CF in the country so that we can tell you, yes, we're ready for a trial, here's 100 people and 100 people, and do it. So for them, when they have people that start on a new drug, they follow very closely how did the PFTs change? Did they gain weight? How's their vitamin D? Whatever. And that's like a direct feedback then that they use as ammunition to get the next one going. So it just kind of varies according to the condition and the drug itself. Kind of hit these. Highlight down there at the bottom, pediatric patients are the least studied. That's true across the board. There are most drugs in pediatric use, neonatology, intensive care, general community, actually have never been studied in kids. They've been studied in adults, and the dose dropped and used. And everybody's like, let's see how it goes. That's sort of been the traditional way. In these pivotal trials, especially for rare conditions, that does not fly. It has to be like very regimented and very specific. There's differences in metabolism, things like that. It's just always been very expensive to do it, but you'd be kind of shocked if you Google that and look it up. But there's a lot of drugs that have never been studied before. This is just I've kind of hit on a lot of these things. I thought this was good. There are meetings that happen periodically with clinical trial centers that have national meetings, and people are always highlighting the things that really are the main roadblocks to making trials happen faster. And I hope that we're turning the corner somewhat. It is a little bit easier to get things out there. Communication's better. It's easier to recruit people. There's a little bit of a new model that's happening in clinical trials where most of the time it's someone who's in medicine at an institution who partners, and this is where the patients come from, and you go further from that. More recently, there are some individuals that are opening up a clinical trial center. So they're not seeing patients clinically. Like I go to the clinic and see people on a regular basis. I'm on call and I go see NICU babies. And then I also do trials here. But in these centers like this, like they're just doing trials. So it makes it all a little bit more efficient. I can see that really taking off probably in the next decade or so. who starts a trial, why, how, and the overall process. This is a nice reference. Again, I know this is an older article, but it talks a very nice big picture. It's not a real long article about how sort of the chronology of events. So in the 80s, early drug development was very much focused on infectious diseases and enzymes and the potential for enzyme replacement. There wasn't really a space for gene therapy or terribly invasive things. A lot of that duplicate Me Too things were there. And people started paying a lot of attention to patents, getting a patent for something to develop, and then that sort of locks out other people from studying it. And there were lots of investigators that were at institutions that really partnered up to do this, and that's where some of like the unsavory feeling that people have about clinical trials, because that's what funded those people's work. Some people made too much money off of it, a lot of conflicts of interest. There were issues to make progress there. In the 90s, the 2000s, the process became longer and longer and longer to do this because more regulations went in place. The regulations definitely protected people, but it slowed the whole process a lot more. And in general, it started to take a lot more time, a lot more money to be able to do this. To facilitate that, to grease the wheels, a lot of companies, quote unquote, bought researchers. And so that was, again, a negative about it that really sort of propagated through that time. And then going into the teens, and I'll say now into the 20s, really advances in genetics, genetic medicine, human genetics, immunology, especially in cancer, with a concerted goal to improve quality of life and prolong life. And there have been more and more startup companies now, and paying attention to rare diseases. So I don't know if anybody here has an MBA or you're really into business or anything. I don't love that part. I don't love the whole business money part of it. But the reality of things is, for people to study rare diseases, they have to have, they meaning a company, an individual, or consortium, whatever, they have to have something that actually worked and made a lot of money to be able to support rare disease. That's the reality of it. Getting investors to say, I really want this, I'll be a philanthropy investor type thing, and then it's got to get further down the road for them to actually see any revenue back. There's a whole bunch of different models. It's not my thing to understand it. Frankly, I don't want to be involved with that. I want to do the patient side and not have to worry about the conflict part, but it's a real thing. I have no idea, no crystal ball of like where it's going, but if you're venturing into this, I would say educate yourself on the possibilities of how this is all going to move forward in the future. Now trials can happen basically anywhere, which I think is a good thing for patients. And how does a trial come to be? It's kind of usually on one of these two pathways, where someone who's in a lab studying some cell lines, studying some patients, or I see all the people in the world with X condition, trying to partner up with people who have the ability to find the investors, mass produce the drug or the piece of equipment or whatever, and then hopefully get approval from the FDA to move further so that you can go forward with the trial. And this is the place where another acronym gets involved, a contract research organization. So even as of 2 decades ago, if Pfizer said we want to do a trial, then Pfizer hired a bunch of people that would come to me and meet with me, and we'd make sure all the documentation's done, we made sure the hemoglobin level's right, like their monitor for it, and how we ship the drug in, and how we get the result from the x-ray so that it's all uniform, because every center that's doing it, it all has to be exactly the same. And companies started figuring out, like, wait, this is way too much for us to manage. We want to make the drug and we'll fight the fight with the FDA, but we need a contract research organization who's going to manage like logistics. So in the last couple of decades, it's been that way. I will say in the last like year or two, companies now are like, I think it might be easier if we just take it back in-house. I don't know what's really going to happen, but I'm telling you all these working parts because all of these working parts, there's jobs there. And if there's something that really appeals to you, like your background that you'll have coming out of this, being the researcher who can reach out to pharma, being the researcher who can reach out to a contract research organization or other physicians who maybe are seeing the patients, like it takes a village. Okay. That was my commercial on that. So what's the process? Somebody will contact me from Pfizer or Roche or a startup and say, hey, we got this idea, we want to tell you about it. at our institution and most academic institutions, they send a contract to me that I have to sign that says I'm not gonna tell everybody your idea so that somebody else can steal it. That has to go through our lawyers here at our institution because I'm an employee of the institution. So that goes through there, they all sign off on it, then we can all talk about it, then I have a meeting with them, they tell me about the investigational pharmaceutical, the trial, whatever. Do I have enough patients to participate? Do I want to do it? Does it seem like does the science seem like it makes sense? Do I have patients that want it? Because all of these things, like I'm not going to put all this investment into it if I have patients that don't even want to think about it. All of that goes through. The company says also, here's what we think we should pay you to be able to enroll each individual patient, have them follow up 13 times in 3 years. Then we start working on the budget. Then we put a thing into our IRB. So the company gives us their protocol, but I need to make sure that I and my institution, and we all think that it's safe for my patients to participate. So we go through all that part. Of course, there's lawyers involved. And no offense if maybe there's a lawyer, they're involved to make sure that I have to follow the protocol, that I'm doing that in a safe way, but that the work that I do is owned by me. And that as we're getting through the whole process, how will data be released? Will it be publicly like at ASHG? Will it be publicly in news alert? Will I be an author? Will I not be an author? That sort of thing. And all that stuff is negotiable. And I do ask to be involved in all those points and places because those are really important, pivotal pieces of academia that come out for patients that goes globally. I want it to be peer reviewed. I want it to be criticized before it comes out like that. So that's all involved in that too. Protocol, the consent form, ICF is consent form, informed consent form, and assent if a patient's young, and then how we manage the data. All the infrastructure for the visits, DSMB means Data Safety Monitoring Board, data entry, and then all the closure of the study and how we write up things. All the people that it takes to do this. Kind of gone through a lot of the pieces and parts. This is a lot of moving parts. Sometimes you just get 2 or 3 people through a protocol. So you really have to want it and know that the patients really want it as well. A couple other references, you'll see them in there. Different people's views about how to bridge those gaps. Those are big, big gaps between pharma and a family and someone who wants to help them and someone who recognizes the natural history. It takes everybody to make this work. And I pulled out a few that I thought were nice representations of that. Opportunities, pitfalls, and considerations. So opportunities. What I've talked about, it doesn't really matter what disease or patient population or drug or intervention it is. It's a template that you can apply to anything. So if you develop your passion in understanding vascular disease or the life cycle of a model organism and how can you alter like life duration, maybe there's something in the telomeres or whatever the thing is, you can apply all of this to whatever field is of interest to you. Personal opinion, I think a lot of people feel this way. These trials are a very direct way to reach my patients. It's not just being able to sit there anymore and be able to say, well, here's your diagnosis, go forth and conquer. Our clinical practice here at Hopkins is not based on that. We do a lot of diagnostic things, particularly inpatient, but we actually provide health care. We set up long-term surveillance, what to expect. That's called anticipatory guidance. Who else in your family is at risk? That's all part of genetic medicine, human genetic medicine. And we do all of that stuff, but it's just so lovely to actually have some treatments to actually offer to alter quality of life and long-term outcomes. Really great way that I've met lots of other clinicians who are kind of a single person on an island someplace studying whatever, and we can actually work together. There is huge opportunity for independent research studies. I'm going to give a couple examples there. So from my particular focus, these things have been all very fruitful. So very often I can go to a company and say, I've always had an interest in energy balance, calories in, calories out. we're giving this new medicine. I'd like to do a little sub-study where I'm gonna look at body morphometry, like fat folds and resting basal metabolic rate, all this kind of stuff. I want to do a little sub-study on the 12 people that are my site that have this. And so I write a little independent research grant. They give me funding for it. This is great. This is great. This is like really wonderful of a way, and they don't own anything of what I do for it. It was a grant. I have it. I can do what I want from it. The natural history thing, in like the last 12, this is like 12 years or so, one company, and now it's an epidemic, there's about 6 companies, decided they were going to develop treatment for people with achondroplasia, the most common short stature dysplasia. I've got a couple of slides coming up here. That's the one that, that's the condition that Peter Dinklage has, kind of large head, long trunk, short limbs, most common. And this one company developed a drug based on great animal model work. I've got a couple of images I'll show you here in a second. And they came to a Little People of America meeting, and they said, we want to cure everybody. They're going to love this. You know, this is like going to be revolutionary. And it was a massive blow up. You know, people are like, I'm fine with who I am. There's nothing wrong. If it's going to change my surgical outcomes, if it's going to change something else, maybe. But just to make me taller, I don't want it. Fine. There's some people that do. I mean, it's like a whole variety of things. But huge assumption that everybody wanted this. That was one. And then second, when they actually started to do the trial, they're like, so what's the normal growth pattern for people with achondroplasia so we can compare to? And there was one set of growth curves that in the early 80s had been made from like 60 people or so, which was a great start. It was hand smooth, so there weren't even programs to like, what's the standard deviation? Can we model this? Should we have bigger bins, shorter bins, a spline, whatever? None of that was done. It was literally, you know, hand smooth, thin paper, up against light, like that kind of thing. And they're like, what do you mean there's no curves? They hadn't even done that. They didn't even know what the rates were of surgeries and things like that. That was a huge opportunity that we took. So we started a natural history study where we collected data from 1,400 people from 4 different dysplasia sites. And now we have those data, completely independent research, published all of it in great journals, careers for genetic counselors who were in our groups and all kinds of stuff, and very helpful to our patients. We wanted to know the same information, but it's very expensive and very difficult to put that together. So perfect combination, and it's been very good. And that all came from rare disease where bringing it up to them like, hey, you actually don't have good baseline. We can do that. So just keep that in mind. Expert panels, I've really enjoyed meeting people from all over the world. And this drug thing that I was talking about for people with achondroplasia, it's very different in the United States. We have Americans with disabilities. Every public place has to be fitted with a door bump thing to be able to open the door for someone to go in. Blah, blah. It's not like that in Italy. It's not like that in Africa. It's not like that in a lot of places. For those places, I've learned a lot about how some of those treatments are really been more embraced because it really changes quality of life like quickly in a lot of people versus maybe a little bit more chance to reject it here. And that's the same in all kinds of drug trials and things that I've been involved with. And I wouldn't have known about that had I not met these other people, served on advisory boards, things like that. Have to do the natural history. People want long-term results. The only way you can have long-term results is if you study long-term, or if you have the luxury of looking back retrospective and saying, okay, but there wasn't a trial, there wasn't a treatment then, but how often did this happen, X, Y, Z? You've got to have the medical records to be able to do that. Treatment recommendations, I didn't say this about the other thing. Part of that deal of meeting up with other people who take care of patients, I just told you achondroplasia is the most common short stature dysplasia, so that's the one that got all the press and all the attention for these new drug trials. There are 400 other forms of short stature dysplasia, and all those folks are like, hey, study me too, we want help also. And sometimes, it has evolved where there are more and more trials that are happening in these different forms, but it's still not all 400. Well, those folks still need treatment guidelines and management and anticipatory guidelines. So we've been writing things for generalities like, all the dental and craniofacial issues for any dysplasia, how can this be applied? And then when those things are published in peer-reviewed things, those individuals can use that to inform their home physicians, because maybe they're not going to a specialized center, or fight with their insurance to say, no, it says here I have to have a sleep study because I've got a craniofacial difference, and you can get that. So that's been useful too. This is for future studies, so we are doing prospective studies now. Is everybody aware that everyone with achondroplasia has the exact same nucleotide change, 1138 G to C in FGFR3? But we see huge variation in their phenotypes. And sometimes even when someone is newborn for their first couple of years of life, those individuals haven't had the opportunity to have the effect of environment. So in adults, we all make decisions differently. Our activity levels, our diet, we smoke, whatever. That can influence the severity of the manifestations of any condition. But in a younger person, those are modifiers. That's other parts of their genetic message that's making them very different. So people with achondroplasia are the perfect people to actually look for that. So we're building a database right now of blood samples and saliva samples where we'll have whole genome and be able to compare and even look at everybody who needed this certain surgery, what else is similar, dissimilar about them, who didn't need it, similar, dissimilar. And some of the stuff like this for low back pain and spinal stenosis, every single person with achondroplasia has spinal stenosis. If we understand that better, that could be applied to the general population, which nobody can argue that back pain is not something that's quite prevalent in the general population. I'm going to show you just a couple of slides about that database that we were able to build here. Does everybody know about the REDCap system? I feel like I'm always like trying to drop certain things in here. It's a very user-friendly database. You can access it through School of Medicine, School of Public Health. It's just a very user-friendly interface. Check it out sometime. Really great administrators here at Hopkins that can help you to build things. It's a really nice way to build a database that you can put genomic data in, you have x-rays in it. You can have an interface direct to patients where you say, oh, fill out this survey. They fill it out, it goes straight into your database. It's really quite lovely. So we use that, and we focused on 4 very specific things, not, people say everything but the kitchen sink is what you study. You can't do that. You can't do that in clinical trials, and you can't do that in natural history studies because you don't finish anything. So we focused on these 3 things: anthropometry, that's body measurement, surgical burden, sleep disorder, breathing, and then made a huge catalog of all the images that the 1,400 people had because now we're using that prospectively. And we're doing the prospective part about craniofacial structure, metabolism, neurocognition, pain and function right now. Just to give you a little idea about achondroplasia itself, in the United States, very few people do limb lengthening procedures, pretty invasive surgical procedure where the leg is broken, rods are put in, internal or external, pulled apart, and new bone goes in where the fracture is, and that gives you length. It's used very heavily in Italy and Japan, not so much here. And I really hope and think that the rate will go down even more because of now the new drugs that are basically doing the same thing. Sometimes people are born a little bit premature. It's probably because of the large size of the head. A lot of adoption. It's a higher rate within the LP community, little people community in the United States. And take home that 80% of individuals with achondroplasia, they're the first person in their family that had it. Lots of surgical burdens. So these are the 5 main categories of surgeries that people need who have achondroplasia. And I can't remember if I have it here, but for comparison, having tonsils or tubes put in, achondroplasia, 65% of our population need, and the general population is about 3 to 5%. Brain or shunt surgeries, less than 1%. Nobody needs a foramen magnum decompression. 20% of people with achondroplasia need the little hole at the base of the spine or base of the skull widened because it's compressing things. Spine surgery, that as you go into adulthood is closer to 12 to 30%, depending on it. And then surgeries within the legs itself, very rare. And 80% of the people had at least one of these, and multiple people had multiple ones. So 4,500 surgeries in 1,400 people. That's a big surgical burden. So if these new medications can change any of that, if you grow more and you have less stenosis, that'd be fabulous. if you grow more and the synchondroses stay open longer so the foramen magnum doesn't get too small too fast and you can avoid those surgeries, that'd be great. So that's what's being studied now, because it'll be 10 years or 20 years before we know what we're doing right now has that effect. And that's why it's important to build some of those registries too. Oh, I did put that comparison. Okay, so from that, we've published a lot of papers that are describing those pieces and parts. All of this has been possible because of the additional funding that we got among our sites. And we've also, a few of us within this group have been part of a new consortium to also write grants to a whole variety of companies to be able to get together and do a Delphi process so that we can have treatment guidelines. So where there wasn't enough money or people or time to be able to do a randomized double-blind placebo-control to say it's better to have your teeth straightened at this age versus this age. You could imagine you'd have to have a lot of people and a lot of time to do that. We could still write treatment guidelines based on what's in the literature and our personal experience to give people guidance. So that kind of came out of the additional funds that we were able to get from those other trials. So this is the rationale for tackling those issues. People need the ammunition to be able to fight and get those. And we picked different topics. And I said on there we have 6 publications, but we actually have 9 now. I should have updated that slide. So just a variety of things that are useful to people with skeletal dysplasias, short stature dysplasias. Pitfalls, some things that we learned and to keep in mind for future reference. Who wants the treatment? This is what I was alluding to before, that company said this is going to be great, everybody's going to want it, and then there was a big backlash, people didn't want it, and it took a little bit longer to actually get things rolling, etc. We've seen very interesting observations over the years of when a parent is short stature. I personally haven't had any short stature parents who wanted to try any of the trials for their short stature child. They're all average stature. I think that's kind of interesting. There's probably someone's PhD thesis that could be on the decision-making tree of that. I don't know if that's going to start to happen, or in other parts of the world there are some short stature individuals that want to do it. There's a parallel with the deaf communities. Everybody familiar with cochlear implant controversies that happened a while ago? There's still plenty of people that don't want them. Totally fine. Plenty of people that do. It's kind of an interesting controversy. And vast global differences in access and acceptance of the short stature. Food for thought. Very different motivations and background for these 3 key parts to go into the big pot of clinical research with the hope that something's gained and obviously very different outcomes. So I'm coming at this from the middle section, that I want to help patients, that I am with them for the long haul, whether they decide to do any of these trials or not. I think that's a key part for me as a healthcare provider. Definitely getting salary support from my team and for being able to do these things. I feel like it's very useful things, test new ideas, build careers, love all of that. Patients, very different motivations. Sometimes they recognize that maybe it's not going to help, or maybe they don't really want to be in the trial, but they'd be happy to be a part of the natural history part, to contribute things. Sometimes that gives a place to put that desire to help, but not compromise the way they feel about things. And I don't mean to be callous about anything, but obviously the sponsor, their top priority is profit. Like, they're not a company if they're not making something. That's a little bit of the stuff to consider. So just all those things, trying to keep that in mind. What's the motivation? Points to ponder. Have to have some successful things that outweigh things that maybe didn't work. Probably good, and sometimes I say this if I'm talking to people who are clinicians who are trying to decide if they want to really go down a pathway like that, to diversify your research a little bit, where it's not just one gene, one disease, one drug that you're dependent on, because if there's a bad outcome and the FDA closes it down, you're kind of out of luck then, so it's better to spread the wealth there. Just knowing your role is an important piece. Trials, which ones and why, and I did add a couple of slides here that I think are important for you guys to know. You're here at Hopkins, you should know some of the history of how we got to where I have the privilege of running our dysplasia center and seeing these patients. Everybody know who that is over on the left? Anybody? Victor McCusick, namesake of our institute. It's kind of unusual here, but literally in the same summer in '57, Dr. McCusick was here at Hopkins, starting his pathway within the Moore Clinic. We'll talk about that in a second. And Billy Barty, have you ever seen that gentleman before, like in some old clip or something? You can look him up. He was a short stature individual who was in movies and things in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and on up, and he actually started the Little People of America. Okay, so the story goes, Dr. McCusick joined the faculty here. He studied cardiology, auscultation, or listening to heart sounds, Marfan syndrome, developed an interest in human genetics. This is the person who started MIM, so Mendelian Inheritance in Man, and then it became online, working on the Human Genome Project. He became, back in '57, the key date between the two of them, the director of the Moore Clinic here at Hopkins, right across the street from here. I'm pointing that way, I think it's that way. And decided to refocus from chronic disease management into hereditary conditions. And this is him taking pictures of a young child with Ellis von Creveld syndrome, polydactyly, short stature, some heart defects and things. In the Amish community, this is a recessive condition, so it was more common then because they tend to, mate within their population. And he had a big rapport and research ongoing with them, describing the conditions was a big part at the very beginning of understanding the dysplasia. Was just basically, hey, there's more than 2 different types. We should understand what these are. And actually categorizing people like that, the people he worked with and people who he trained doing that really had a lot to do with how so many genes were discovered to be causative for different people because they've been phenotyped well. So the same people could be studied at a molecular level and figure that out. So it was kind of cool. Billy Barty, like I said, he was an entertainer. He was on the Art Linkletter show. You'll have to ask like a great-great-grandparent about that or Google it or something. It was an variety show that was on TV. Art Linkletter said, what's so difficult about being a short-stature person? You're in the entertainment business. This is great. He's like, it's really hard to meet people. And the story goes that he looked into the camera and he said, anybody that's a little person out there, I'll buy you dinner in Reno, like in a week and a half or something. Show up, and this will happen. And 16 people actually showed up. This is a picture of it. This is part of the archives that are here at Hopkins and some within the Little People of America as well. And we got one more picture. That's them in front of the restaurant. And out of this group of people, and primarily Billy Barty right there in the center, came the idea for Little People of America. So there were 20 people at the start, started a national convention. Their big idea was to be able to meet people, kind of the social part of it, and have a place where this group could facilitate adoptions. So average stature people that didn't want to raise a short stature child would give up the child for adoption. They would facilitate that. That was a big piece of it. By the 60s, there were 700 people. Now it's the largest patient support group for short stature people, over 8,000 people. And there's some shots of now it's got athletics, it's got advocacy, it's a much broader thing than just adoptional. It's still a key part. And beyond the social part, although it's a very social organization, they both went on their pathways here over time. See the smaller feet, bigger feet? And finally, in 1965, they met. So apparently, the story goes, there was someone who was in the key group building the LPA who saw an article in Time or Life, and put it up here, Time, about Dr. McCusick with that Amish population. And they're like, my gosh, he's doing this stuff. We should have him come. He could meet all of our people. This would be great. Kind of was the start of running sort of researchy kind of clinic, giving some help to people that came to the LPA. He came to the first conference in 1965, started focusing that clinic that he was doing inherited disease very much on short stature and dwarfism and things, and still other things, but definitely skeletal dysplasias. The LPA becomes an annual event, and now they're partners. And then an LPA conference in '68 happens here at Hopkins at the Evergreen House. That's Dr. McCusick and his right-hand assistant, Kay Smith, and Billy Barty, and some of the people that started the group. Dr. McCusick always ran around and took lots and lots of pictures of people all the time. And I never found him in this picture here. I think he probably took the picture, but it's in his archives here. And it's just kept on going from there. More funding came in, March of Dimes, short stature symposia, then families started to come here for these things. Sometimes they would put people on the clinical research unit to better understand, can growth hormone change growth for these individuals? It doesn't really, because it's not a growth hormone problem. But there are all kinds of things happening there. More symposia here. This is actually, I think, out on the front side. I don't know if you recognize where this is. I'd love to know exactly where it is. I think it's on the side from where the Reed Hall used to be, but I don't know. The brochures about these conferences, very much the same topics that we have now. So it's like 60 years later, belonging issues, the using growth hormone. People were very concerned that everybody would be tall and we wouldn't have our identity. It didn't work, but it works now. The new drugs work now. Little people with average stature kids, average stature parents, all the same topics. It's kind of interesting. Mr. and Mrs. Greenberg, Kathy and Alan Greenberg, saw more stories about Dr. McCusick as things were going into the 80s. Thankfully, they established the Greenberg Center for Skeletal Dysplasias in the early 90s. I had the opportunity to work with Dr. McCusick a little bit at the beginning when I was transitioning on as the clinical director and then took over as the director in 2008. And we've just continued to build our umbrella where now it's not just the dysplasias, but metabolic bone conditions and dysostoses, so rickets, a bunch of different forms like that. And dysostoses means not every bone in your body is affected, but it could be just your palate, the bone there, your craniosynostosis, limb differences, things like that. Anything bone related that's a genetic skeletal disorder, that's under our umbrella now. Our wonderful team, and what we do now, see lots of patients, coordinate things, lots of clinics, free clinics for individuals that can't come here, and one detour slide of words that are okay and words that are not for short stature individuals. So short stature is fine, little person, LP, dwarf, skeletal dysplasia using first person language. Mary is a patient with achondroplasia. Not that Mary's an achon, but she has a condition. And we don't use normal height. I'm average stature. If I'm normal height, then all my patients are abnormal. They're not abnormal, they're short stature, so we really go out of our way to do that. And for your information, midget is considered extremely derogatory by the community because it's very sideshowy, circusy kind of thing, and people don't like that. So which trials to pursue? That was our little detour through history there. I kind of hit on these things that I find fulfilling, things that can really help people, big umbrella, all genetic conditions, some truthful financial and job security things, partnership with other people I find are interesting and have common likes. And we've also used that to build multidisciplinary clinics. That's the way medicine should be done, where a patient in a short period of time sees multiple providers, and then the providers talk to each other and decide what's best for the patient's partnership thing. So I've developed that within our dysplasia group, within our cleft group, and within our dysostosis group. That is the most efficient way to do it. Very proud of that. The trials. We did this. We did this, we did this. I'm sorry, I had some repeated things in here. And I'm getting close to the end, but I actually am close to the end of the slides here. Have I given you a lecture on FGFR3 and achondroplasia yet or anything? They may know anything about it? A very quick, in a nutshell here, normal function of the protein product from FGFR3 is the little blue and the three squiggles there. Normally, you've got to have fibroblast growth factor come along, come into the receptor dimerizes, I think I put that there, dimerizes, and then the message intracellularly through the MAP kinase, tyrosine kinase pathway is, hey, slow down growth a little bit, slow down growth a little bit. And that's fine, that's a normal function, a little slow down growth, because there's other trophic pathways happening at the same time. The net result is growth. But this is just one that's like, hey, just tone it down a little bit. Once that activation happens, then it gets turned off. It gets signaled to the lysosome deteriorated, and then it allows more regular growth to happen. That's the normal function. If you have pathogenic variants in FGFR3, it makes an abnormal protein product, and any one of those steps can get sort of screwed up. So up there where it dimerizes, if you've got a mutation right at the transmembrane domain, it kind of gets stuck. It's just stuck, and the message just keeps going on, and it doesn't ever get routed intracellularly to the lysosome, just turned on, slow down growth, slow down growth. Part of the ubiquitination can be screwed up. It just depends on where it is in it for the different variants. I think I put that in the next slide. No, I didn't. Okay, so achondroplasia is the most common. That's where the tyrosine or the transmembrane domain abnormality is. There are some lethal forms of FGFR3 conditions called thanatophoric, like Thanos, death-bringing. That's what it means. And those are the ones where the ubiquitization can't happen, hypochondroplasia is a milder form, a whole bunch of different things. They kind of look similar, but a spectrum from lethal up to just a little bit shorter than other people and kind of shorter limbs. But the bottom line is that the normal pattern of slowdown growth just gets turned on way too much. So that's the premise behind these 4, in the black boxes, mechanisms of treatment to sort of counteract that message. So this is the same FGFR, I guess I could use it this way. That's the ligand coming in there, the extracellular loops, transmembrane domain, and the signaling that should happen in here to slow down growth. The first one that was developed, let me go around I'll go around it like a clock. There was a company in this early process who developed a little decoy receptor, and the idea was instead of letting the FGF go into the receptor and make this slow down growth message happen, the decoy would pick it up, take it out of circulation, it wouldn't be available. The early trials did not work. It was from Pfizer. There wasn't any difference in growth after the first trials happened, like the phase 2 stuff, so canceled off. These two over here are 2 separate companies, Ascendus and Biomarin. Biomarin worked on theirs first. They figured out, and this was actually known in the mouse model back even in like late 80s, early 90s, that if you gave naturally occurring C-natriuretic peptide to an achondroplasia mouse in a continuous infusion for several weeks, they would actually grow. And you couldn't tell the difference between wild type mouse of that mouse model. But the tricky part at that time, and there's lots of articles that talked about this, we don't have any way to deliver something by continuous infusion. It doesn't work. It only lasts for a few seconds, so you have to do it that way. We don't have the technology to alter the C-natriuretic peptide so it sticks around longer. But people did develop that, and that was the basis of the trials that have happened recently. So it's a C-natriuretic peptide analog. It's got a poly-A tail on it. It doesn't get degraded in the same way. And it inhibits the inhibition, so it allows more regular growth. And this has already gone through FDA approval, and it's commercially available, and there's 4,000 people in the world that take that medication. And slowly but surely, individuals who still have open growth plates, so a little bit around puberty and earlier, they're getting taller. They're actually on average stature curves, low end, and they're still disproportionate, but that's where they are. This company used the same C-natriuretic peptide, but they bound it to a proprietary carrier that's actually used in other conditions too, hypoparathyroidism, growth hormone deficiency, some cancers, and basically found the same thing. Theirs is still in trials. That's everything in a nutshell. There are trials that are still ongoing. Oh, I forgot the tyrosine kinase one. Hold on. Intracellularly, the phosphorus that gets placed on the tyrosine kinase is what activates it and causes that slowdown growth. Tyrosine kinase inhibitor drugs are very common in oncology. This is a drug that actually infigratinib was used in cholangiocarcinoma, so cancers of the biliary tree. And QED repurposed it because in the mouse model they found that they were growing like crazy. So they tried it in the achondroplasia mouse model. They grew, actually made the foramen magnum bigger because the synchondrosis didn't close, so kind of excited about this. And I didn't mention that these are shots once a day, which goes over really well with a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, that's the problem. This is oral, and so that's kind of part of the competition too. And we have people on different parts of the trials. Okay, so they're ongoing current trials, kind of exciting. Other genetic skeletal conditions, this has been an absolute game changer. This is one of the metabolic bone conditions. We were involved in some of those, and now in a new formulation of enzyme replacement therapy. It's a lethal skeletal dysplasia. Basically, infants don't make bones. If you don't have bones, you can't have the musculature of your chest to be able to breathe. Athg is a company developing therapies for TRP for the bad skeletal phenotype and a Charcot-Marie tooth phenotype. And I've had the opportunity to serve on the data safety monitoring board, and that's been kind of interesting too. Got big trials going on with cladocranial dysplasia. One of your colleagues, Ella Mitchell, is working on this project with us, figuring out the genetic cause for those, making treatment guidelines, and then we've got the phase 2 of clarity stuff going on. other stuff, lots of stuff, and our glossary. And that's it. Some references, and one of our very cool patients right up there. Actually, is that part might be closed off right now because of the buildings now. I love that picture. It's so awesome. That's it. That's it. I can take a question or two, and I'm on the 5th floor of MRB, very end of the hallway. Catch me if you have questions, but I'm happy to talk with you. If they have anything, maybe it wasn't clear, or
I just kind of like one question, like interacting with patients, like the surgery page, like it feels like there's a lot of like morbidity. Like, do they associate it with the short staff? Like, and kind of like, I guess, like hesitance about drugs. Like, do they separate it from the short staff, I guess?
Yeah, a lot of people do, but you know, it's kind of a thing that's become familiar. And I think that some people, like when my mom was like that, everybody I'm with, the LPA is like that. I think that's where a lot of our average stature parents really focus on that. Like they're very focused on height. I'm not gonna say that they're not, you know, that's the elephant in the room. But a lot of them are like, gosh, if we could not have them have back surgery or blah, 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 then we wanna do it. But the key thing that we bring up all the time is we don't know that. We don't know that right now. All we know is height. We know that it's in the randomized of one placebo control, it was 1.57 centimeters different in 1 year between the placebo and the other. Now, it's been studied longer and we know it adds up. It actually lasts. So that's something you can talk about, but does it change surgical outcomes? We really don't know. We're not gonna know that for another decade or 2 decades. So we really call people out on that. Like, no, you can't hang your hat on that. Because you can't come back here yelling at me when she needs back surgery, because we don't know, it's only height. That's a good question.
I guess 2 really quick questions. So how long do patients, I mean, we don't know, but how long right now are patients, like adolescent patients, treated with, say, the one of those injections?
The CNATRA peptide thing. So right now, it's approved from birth until your growth plates close. So there are some people that are even starting the shots, you know, first few days of life if they want. There's a little bit of early evidence in one of the trials I didn't go into that maybe the facial structure is a little bigger and maybe the frame magnet's a little bigger. So some people know that those data and they want to do it. Other people are like, I want to kind of get to know my kid. I want to make sure everything's safe. I told you 20% need that big neurosurgery. You know, there's a lot of not instability early on. You know, in another decade we'll know, oh, everybody should do that. Like that's the standard care, and then we'll go forward, but we don't right now. Okay. Growth is kind of cool in achondroplasia. Usually all of us, we hit puberty. Girls, we kept growing for like a year, year and a half, maybe 2 years after we hit puberty. Guys, you can grow a couple more years beyond that, and puberty probably happens a little bit later than in girls. But once the growth plates are closed, like you're done. People with achondroplasia do not have a pubertal growth spurt. Pretty much no one with a skeletal dysplasia does. The effect of the protein product from whatever their abnormal gene just sort of overrides hormones. They have puberty. Everything's normal, everybody's fertile, all that stuff. Just no pubertal growth spurt. And actually what we found in our natural history study is that people keep growing till they're 18, 19, 20 years old. Their growth plates are still open. I don't know why, but they are. And so some people are still using the medications at 18, 19 years of age. So it kind of varies. We do x-rays periodically of hands and knees. We look at their velocity very carefully with stadiometers and figure out can, should, would they be still on treatment. Any other questions? Thanks for listening. It was nice to interact. Very nice to do something in person.